Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome back. This is March, so it's Women's History Month. I did a large discussion in regards to Women's History Month a couple of weeks ago, but this one is going to be. I read four uh, books this month that will be for women's history. So, three of them. Well, two of them are autobiographies. One of them is a biography, and then the first one here, it's written by a woman, so I'm accounting it since it doesn't fit really with the rest of the stuff I'm reading this month anyway. So I'm just going to include it here. I had not intended to read it this month, but I had it on hold at the library and it finally came out. So it is called Stiff by Mary Roach, and it's about cadavers. And uh, it's not that it's a funny topic, it's just I know that you guys are gonna be like, what am I reading? But I read everything. So a lot of the ways that they deal with dead bodies and stuff I was already familiar with because I read two books by Caitlin, and I think it's Daughtry. And one was From Here to Eternity, which is about how the death is handled in a lot of different cultures and how they handle the dead and take care of the dead and all that. And then she did a memoir about her time working in a crematorium called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. That kind of dealt with a lot of this stuff as well. But I did enjoy Stiff because it detailed a bit differently than what Caitlin had included in hers. And so you get the idea of the cadavers, how they were treated sort of before as well. So you kind of get the history of the Egyptians and the grave robbers and stuff like that. But then what's interesting, and then Caitlin mentioned this in hers as well, that what happens to cadavers when you donate your body to science. And so that's always kind of been a fascinating topic ever since I heard about it in Caitlin's books. So when Mary talked about it in Stiff, I was familiar with it, but I always like to hear just the different things. So she had different stories and anecdotes that she uses for what happens to, like I said, the cadavers. Which is interesting is that she also did this chapter about what happens to the ones who donate, like living donations. Or living transplant. So like not when you're a cadaver and your parts get all separated and you go in for different scientific advancements and stuff and studies, but what happens to your organs if you are a donor. And so there are studies and stories of people who have interesting experiences once they receive the donor organs, and how sometimes they supposedly take on the traits of the person that they're getting the organ from, or sometimes they use that as a reason to like be able to become something different by saying, or like saying it's part of what you inherited from this new organ, which is really interesting because I had an idea for a short story that I always wanted to do that included a topic like this. So maybe I will actually write it someday. But just the idea that there are people who they thought that they're men who think that they're if they're getting a man's heart or a man's organs, they have to be more masculine now because they must have had the organ from like a hero or some really traditionally masculine man. Or you have ones who found out that their donators were likely like prostitutes or something. And so like then the women became promiscuous as like excuse for having inherited their organs, which was just really fascinating to read. And another one that was interesting was they did a study on what it would be like for the crucifixion of Jesus, and how there are people who sign up to learn what it's like, that they actually volunteer to get tested to see what it would like to be crucified. And they don't do the nails and stuff. They usually just like tie them up, but see how long they can suspend on a cross, to see if, you know, how their breathing changes, see if they do try to lift themselves up, like all the different sources say what it was like to have been crucified. And the fact that there are so many people who actually not only want to study that aspect, but also want to volunteer to know what it was like is astounding. And then they try to like prove or disprove if it could have happened the way that the Bible had said it did. And just, there was a whole lot going on in this story, and I found it absolutely fascinating, the topics. So I'll definitely be reading more of Mary Roach's stuff. But this one was my first, and it was interesting. And then the next ones that I read, I listened to all these, by the way. I have not really been in the mood to physically read. I just can't stay engaged with everything going on. And so I've been having to listen to it, and a lot of the times I was even having a hard time listening to stuff. So I had to find things that were just either good narration or just completely different. This one, the Stiff, was actually very amusingly written. It wasn't dry or depressing or anything like that. And then I read that early in the month anyway. But my next one was The Aviator and the Showman. And the Showman was George Putnam. And it's the dual biography of George Putnam and Amelia Earhart, sorry. And so that's by Lori Gwen Shapiro. And what's interesting about Amelia is that most people are fascinated with her disappearance, but this was about that at the end, which I had already knew about and read things about. But this is more also about the her whole life and like her family history. And there were some really weird references and correlations. So like she had she was encouraged to learn and to be educated. She actually had to travel to a bunch of different states. She lived a lot of different places, and she always tried to fit in, but she was smarter than most, and she didn't always, especially always being the new kid and stuff. And so she also was more of a tomboy. Her parents encouraged them to play sports. She got to do a lot of things that women at that time were not doing. So she was born in the end of the 1800s. So it was, now I don't remember, like I think it was 1897. Because I had a great-great-grandma that was born in 1898, and I was just fascinated with how close their lives would have been. Like she would have heard a lot of what Amelia had done, but also had a lot of similar experiences having grown up and had to work a lot and kind of not live the way that a lot of women were living at the time. So she probably would have understood and appreciated that about Amelia. But Amelia actually had a couple of times that she had spent in Michigan, which is a connection for me, So she was in Saugatuck, Michigan, which is on Lake Michigan, and she spent a summer there between school years, and met people, made connections and stuff. And just the next time she was in Battle Creek at a not a mental institution, but it was a mental like a medical facility. And what is people might not know about Battle Creek and the Kellogg Company, but they're very white supremacist. They were believed in eugenics, and they were very racist and stuff. And she actually, it was mentioned when she went to that facility that that's the area that she had to go in when she was being treated for some of her medical conditions. And so I found those connections interesting. Another thing is she went up to to Canada for a while, and there it was where she saw the horrors of World War One, because the United States did not enter the war until it was almost done, the First World War. And so she was there prior to, and saw soldiers returning and missing limbs, or really scarred, or all the trauma and stuff. And so she started doing a lot of like working for the Red Cross. She did a lot of social work and stuff in her life. She always called herself a social worker first, and then she basically flying was her hobby. So when we learn about Amelia, we usually, assume she's a pilot, but she actually wasn't. And she did not have a lot of the proper training. She met this George Putnam, who was this basically kind of, well, they call it the showman. He found talent and then essentially exploited them for money. In a way, he sent a bunch of people from some kids who were in the Boy Scouts and stuff. He sent them to Africa for wild game hunting to try to learn about that, so that the people back here could read about their big adventures. And so like he just did like a whole lot of stuff, represented a whole lot of people, just to like sensationalize them and try to get profit from them. And so because Amelia knew him, eventually they had an affair, and he left his wife, and then eventually married Amelia. But because of their connection, she got to do a lot of things that she really was not, should not have done, that she wasn't trained for, that she was not prepared for. And that is a lot of the reason why it then led to her disappearance, because so many things went wrong with that trip around the world that she was trying to do, that just from the start it was not going to likely be successful. But you don't really realize all that just because you always hear about her flying around the world and the things that she did as one of the first women pilots. But she was not the first. They do not mention, and the book talks a lot about the racism and the racial aspect of it, because a lot of the pioneering women pilots were black women, and of course they do not get the recognition that they deserve. But then the actual pilots, the ones who did the training and stuff, also didn't get the notoriety that Amelia did, just because they weren't connected to somebody like George Putnam. So that affected a lot of her opportunities and allowed her to do all those things, but to her detriment, because they kept pushing her to be more in the public eye, doing more and more things, but not properly ever training her to do those. Like, so she never learned Morse code, which would have helped her to try to get information of her location and trying to get contact with the people who were tracking her. She could not do that. And so when there was no way to contact them, she just had to, you know, just rely, just rely on her own skills, which were lacking in a lot of areas, which I found interesting. Another really weird connection that Amelia had was one of the schools that she went to was basically kind of like a, not just a boarding school, but like a pre-military type of school for youth to like, a lot of the women were going there so that they could kind of, you not only get educated, but you have to do like calisthenics and different, you got to keep in shape and do exercises, and you learn discipline and all this stuff that they wanted to learn that would not have been given to a lot of other women at that time. So they kind of wanted to do this. But the interesting and kind of strange aspect of that is that that school was actually what Hitler based his youth on, his programs, because he wanted to essentially train them from a young age and then also brainwash them that he used that school as a model, which is strange. But anyway, I found it a really interesting story, getting to learn that whole backstory about her, rather than just focusing on her disappearance. The next two that I read, hold on a second.